Two quick observations. First, Jen has faced the nightmare that I've always had, suddenly waking up and realizing I was totally unprepared to do something. Many Saturday mornings I've woken up and thought, oh my gosh, it's Sunday, and I still haven't finished the sermon. The other observation is that the temple took 46 years to build, which really tells you it was a government project. So when we hear this story about Jesus and the Moneychangers and the vendors at the temple, sometimes we don't quite know what to do with it because we're not really sure what we're looking at. We're familiar with the teaching Jesus and the healing Jesus, the forgiving Jesus, the servant Jesus, even the exorcist Jesus, but the walking tall Jesus is just kind of hard for us to grasp. How he could be brought to this moment where he would be flipping over tables and chasing people out of the sanctuary, the courtyard rather, with a whip. So to understand it all, I think it's good to get some perspective. The first temple in Jerusalem was built on Mount Moriah. That's the mountain where God sent Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. So it was a very special place to them. And that first temple was built there, and the Babylonians destroyed it in 586 BC when they took the city. The second temple was rebuilt on that same sacred site about 70 years later when the exiles returned. It was completed shortly before, around 500 BC. And then 500 years later, King Herod, the first King Herod, the crazy one who was also a master builder, he decided that he was going to remodel and rebuild the second temple. And he did this to the point where it became known as Herod's temple and not just the second temple. Now why he did this, we're not exactly sure, because we know he was not a devout Jew. It may have been to try to step out of the shadow of his own ancestry because he was an Idumean. So he was not directly a member of the Jewish tribes. And that was always something that was whispered about in Israel. Or it may have just been his ego when he was trying to show them that he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. But whatever the reason, he embarked on this monumental effort around 20 BC. And the first step in refurbishing and rebuilding and remodeling the temple was to rebuild and remodel the mountain itself, because Mount Moriah was a relatively small plateau that overlooked Jerusalem. And what Herod did is he built these massive retaining walls and filled in the plateau, the area next to the plateau, and leveled it off. So it was a much bigger surface area to build on. And some of those retaining walls are still visible today. The one we call the Wailing Wall is the remainder of one retaining wall from that platform. He spared no expense in doing this, of course, and he spared no expense on the building itself. It was lavishly decorated with gold and the finest marble and alabaster. And Herod created something that ought to have been a wonder of the ancient world, but for some reason it didn't make the cut. From virtually any place in the city, you could look up and see the temple looming over you. It sat like this enormous pearl of staggering size and worth atop Mount Moriah, which they also call the Temple Mount. The walls gleamed in the sun, and it was visible not just in the city, but for many miles away. A pilgrim coming to town could often see it 10 or 20 miles away. And faithful Jews swelled with pride that knowing that here was a very special place, was a fit place for God to set foot when he came to earth again. And if the temple gleamed white during the day, we also know that during the night the great altar glowed continuously because there was a fire always burning. The air above the altar shimmered with the heat given off by the fire, and a chimney of smoke rose heavenward at all times, carried on wings of sweet incense. The incense was part of their religious ceremonies because the Jews believed that it represented the offering of prayers to God. And the sweet smell of incense was like the sweet smell of prayers and praise to God. And also probably the sweet, heavy smell of incense probably helped to cover the scent of blood that had been splashed on the altar and burning animal flesh of the sacrifice. The whole complex was designed to reflect the relationship with God, from the outer court where the Gentiles could be to an inner court, all the way to the inner sanctum where only the high priest could go. It was a physical reflection of the different distances that we feel from God depending on where we are in our faith journeys. It was also a massive worship machine for thousands of people to go to every day to worship and praise God. And there was always a crowd there. And at holiday time, Passover or one of the other holidays, there could easily be hundreds of thousands of pilgrims in town there, all of them wanting to go to the temple. That's where the problem came in. It was a logistical problem because faithful Jews who had journeyed to Jerusalem to be in the presence of God's temple, and when they went there, they were expected to make a sacrifice. They were expected to offer up an animal to the priest to be sacrificed on the altar, and depending upon what the occasion was and why they were there, the animal could range anywhere from an ox to a lamb to a pair of doves. And the purpose of these sacrifices was first to make up for some sin that you had committed, or else just to show gratitude to the one true God for all of the things that had happened in your life. A sacrifice was a central part of their religion. And travelers who arrived from around the world, or at least around the known world to them, well, they didn't always happen to have an animal with them to sacrifice. And certainly the city dwellers who lived with Jerusalem and the surrounding towns did not have free and easy access to lambs and cattle, or even doves. Fortunately, the operators of the temple, the high priests and their followers, had a solution to that problem. Because visitors to the temple could purchase the animal they needed from a vendor, who, as luck would have it, would be standing in the courtyard of the temple, selling their animal. Now, the faithful who visited were also expected to pay an annual tribute to the temple of a half shekel. The only coinage that was acceptable at the temple was coinage that was issued by the temple. These were coins that did not have any graven images on them, no false gods or anything like that. So the temple tax had to be paid with a temple shekel. And visitors who came to town often had other money with them. They would have Roman coins, or Assyrian, or Babylonian, or any variety of kingdoms around the territory. And they would want to make tribute. They couldn't. But coincidentally, there were also people in the courtyard who could take that foreign coinage and exchange it for temple coinage, for a fee. These people were called the Moneychangers. They were the Shohani in Hebrew. So with all that in mind, all of the business aspects, if you want to call it that, of the temple in mind, imagine that you are a pilgrim on the road. You are finally approaching this shimmering white alabaster vision. You've been on the road maybe for weeks, and the excitement has been building as you've drawn closer and closer to Jerusalem. And from miles out, you can see the temple beckoning to you like a lighthouse for the faithful. And you finally get to the city, and you go winding down the streets, and you get to the Temple Mount, and you go up the steps through one of these massive gates, and you enter into the huge courtyard and God's temple, the most holy place on earth. You enter, and suddenly you know you're not just smelling incense, but you're smelling animal manure. And it's not just the faithful pilgrims that are there with you, jostling you in the courtyard, but it's salesmen and bankers, hawking their wares like so many carnival barkers, their voices raised above the hubbub as they try to attract your attention, get you to buy their animal, or to exchange your money with them. So it's not just the majestic prayers of the priests that waft over you like sweet birds climbing to heaven, but it's the rough chorus of business being conducted on holy ground. It was an assault on the senses. The bodies were packed tight, the voices and the catcalls and the bleating and chirping, and all of these things melding together into a senseless buzz that hung over the courtyard. The way the smell of incense and animal flesh and animal dung hung in the air above this place, this holy place. So it's small wonder that I think that Jesus lost his cool. Imagine walking into your childhood home, let alone a church, but just your childhood home, this kind of sacred space in your memory. Imagine walking into it and finding not only strangers there, but strangers who were there selling things. Imagine finding animals running through it and doing whatever it is that animals do in this place. Imagine knowing that it's not just senseless chaos, but it's also calculated greed that you're seeing. It's that dark thing that happens when humans get their guilty hands on something sacred and exploit it for their own good. Who wouldn't freak out? Who could be surprised that Jesus, at this point, would just snap and pour out righteous anger on these sinners as he flipped tables and chased animals and ordered everybody out of this temple, or out of his Father's temple? Because they had not only desecrated a sacred place, they had taken the laws and the ordinances that had been handed down from God, and they had bent them to their own ends and used them to make a profit. So Jesus did what seemed like the right thing, or the only thing for him to do, and he went medieval on it. And in the face of that, his disciples and those who were following him from place to place, they were used to seeing a Jesus that was gentle and patient and loving and melancholy. They must have been shocked to see this Jesus come out. But he made his point. He made his point well enough that we're told from that day on he was a marked man in the eyes of the priests and of the temple authorities. Because not only was Jesus bad for business, but they may also have sensed at least another aspect of Jesus that day. They may have realized that Jesus was there to clear out the cobwebs. He was there to wipe away the old way of doing things, the old way of worship, and to replace it with something different, something new. A new way that would make it possible to draw near to God without making sacrifices, without even going to that temple. He brought a way to fulfill and to complete the law that had been laid down over 1,000 years before on Mount Sinai. And that was dangerous, because it would take the priests and the authorities out of the loop. And it would be bad for business. And as Jesus so often did, he also took this moment to model behavior for us, to teach a lesson to anybody who would follow him. And the lesson is, in the face of injustice, stand up. Call it out for what it is and try your hardest to make it stop. Don't just assume, don't just hope that somebody else is going to do it for you. Because as Christians, it's our responsibility to call it out. On this 50th anniversary of the March in Selma, which is being observed this week, it's a good lesson to hear again. In the face of injustice, we need to stand up. And Jesus also showed us that when we get our hands on even the most sacred things, the most holy duties, we're capable of making them into something offensive and dysfunctional if we lose sight of what they're really for and what they're really about. If we lose sight of the spirit that should lie behind them. It's not the form of what we do that matters, but the heart behind it. We know this, and in our lives, we should approach God with a penitent heart. We should praise God with joy, and not just because it's what we're supposed to do, not just because it's what we're told to do. We should remember not to let the things of this world, the lust for power and greed and all of the rest of those things, become intertwined with the worship of God and our mission to spread the gospel. Because the love of God and the sharing of that love with others, the way we express that love to God, those are sacred things. Those are treasures that we're given, and they are joyful burdens that we have the privilege of carrying. So in this season of Lent, let us be humble in our approach and joyful in our service. And let not the things of this world become entangled with those of the kingdom of heaven. That's the lesson from Jesus.